You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I just want to thank everybody for all their support. So many of you have passed the word on to friends and family about our show, and I think you're doing that because you're learning so much, and I learn every single week, more. Many of you have listened to the show right on our website, boomerstodayradio.com. Some of you, many of you go on your phones. You could go to our app, Boomers Today, on your Apple phone, your Android phone. You could also go on to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, all sorts of podcast stations. We're on there. So thank you so much again for all your support. And I know it's because we have great guests, and we have two. We have two for the price of one here today. So we have with us Kit Pappenheimer and Lynnea Brinkerhoff, who are co-founders of Heartfelt Memorials. Lynnea is an ordained Interfaith Minister, a Disaster Chaplain, and an end-of-life doula, which we'll learn more about, I'm sure. Kit is a former educator, teaching and running public schools, and a longtime hospice volunteer. Both are ICF certified executive coaches, employing heart-based, body-oriented, and trauma-informed practices with a fierce belief in the resilience of the human spirit to face and honor the end of life with dignity and grace. Kit and Lynnea, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Frank. We are really honored to be here.
Yeah, no, this is great, and I'm going to learn a lot with you. I learn all the time, so I got the easy part. I just get to ask you a few questions. So, I went to your website and learned a little bit more about Heartfelt Memorials, and I thought it was just fantastic. So, why don't you share with our listeners just a little bit more about Heartfelt Memorials and kind of how it all happened?
Sure. Well, it's a crazy time being a boomer. We are the sandwich generation between the young people in our lives and the elders in our lives. And our generation is now at the point where if we haven't already lost our parents and our elders, we will soon. And caring for and tending and preparing for that death, and then being with the business of the death afterwards, and then celebrating and honoring the loved one you might have lost, it's quite a moment. And in the time of COVID in particular, we are all faced with the challenge of how exactly do we do that when we can't come together. So Lynnea and I had the opportunity personally and professionally to prepare for this moment in time, and we are now in it. So we've personally gone through it, and now we are offering this experience to others so that they can find a way to honor and celebrate their loved one in a really unique time.
Yes, I was going to ask you if you're willing to share kind of a personal situation for either of you that kind of triggered this.
Yeah, I guess I can offer you this. I was stuck actually in India for the whole first part of COVID this year. And my 93-year-old mother was quickly aging and moving toward her final days. And while I had the opportunity to sing her a lullaby every day and sing her to sleep, I was desperate to get home. And that was quite a challenge. But what I was watching, Frank, was a lot of people in New York passing away, and the groups of people being gathered and nobody being able to really honor the passing and the grief that was associated with that. And I thought, my goodness, I'm an interfaith minister. What can I do? And I thought to begin this virtual experience. But honestly, neither Kit nor I knew that we would end up being our first clients.
Mm. So experience, but for both of you then.
Yes, actually,
Yeah.
yeah, it was my mom first, and Kit was the first person I called within moments of hearing the tragic news for me, and it was not long after that her mom passed, and so I would say that was baptism by fire, and we've been sort of linked at the elbow ever since with this offering.
Yeah. So tell us, take us through, and I'm sure everybody's different, of course, on how they want to celebrate the loved one's life. But kind of take us through it a little bit, if you don't mind.
Well, you bring up a good point right there. Everyone's different. And
Right.
a large part of what we're offering, and our coaching skills help us with this, is the ability to sort of be with what you're experiencing. And, it's interesting. It's a lot like talking about sex, right? In our culture, we don't talk about death.
Right.
And our generation hasn't really we've prepared for end of life, but there has not been a lot of conversation about death and that moment after your loved one dies, and how do you handle it. And so what we're offering is help when you're in the black hole of grief to come up for air and be supported in finding out what it is you need and what your community needs to celebrate your loved one. So there's, if you will, some coaching involved to get to the point of understanding how you'd like to honor your loved one. And then there's the logistics of putting on an event. So, for instance, we'll ask you, how do you want people to feel at the end of your program? What feeling do you want people to come away with? What are three words that describe the event to you? So we'll suss out what sort of an experience someone would want. And then we'll hold their hand and walk them through it. The logistics, the email and guest management, coming up with a program, putting together a slideshow if that's what's wanted. We'll have an online website, an online guest book. And then beyond that, whatever can be imagined, whether it be music or visuals, slideshows, whatever you can imagine, we can facilitate.
So I can't help, bringing up, just personal situation in my family, but we were in a situation, boy, I wish we knew one another at that time. We could have certainly used your help, but we kind of got through it doing a virtual service for my father-in-law when he passed. But I guess my question is the funeral, the actual funeral. How are things changed compared to where, maybe an actual funeral is kind of like that closure for family, and sometimes funeral can't happen in our environment. How have you handled that?
Yeah, Frank, thank you for that. I would actually, I think we really believe that this is the funeral.
Yeah.
You see, our frame has been broken now because, years ago as a minister, I also do weddings, right? And so there I was, and they would have, this was just 2 or 3 years ago, and they had an iPad with grandma sitting in the front seat. And that was like a breakthrough at the time. And here we are, everything is virtual. And really, the funeral homes are utterly backed up beyond measure. They cannot handle the load at all. This is truly an alternative that is starting, now because of the situation. But this is going to go on. This allows people not to have to take 3 days out of their lives, have to wear black, have to show up in a church. This is something that allows us to everybody to come together and the community to reweave itself and to honor the passing of the person. And we ritualize it in every single way that you would in a funeral.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as I say, and I don't want to dwell on my, the situation in my family, but the number of people that attended that virtual service was far greater than the number of people that would have been able to come to the funeral, because the people were coming from, we had people from out of the country, relatives in Canada that would not have been able to come, even in a non-COVID environment. They just, it wouldn't have worked out for them. But so that was kind of nice that, you're really only getting more participation. So how do you see things, in the future with this? Do you see people still utilizing virtual or a combination of, or what do you see happening?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think your experience is common. The last one I did last weekend, we had 200 people from different countries, and interestingly, way more elders than would have participated. Obviously, elders aren't flying. Elderly people aren't able to fly, COVID or not. It's hard to travel. And so people were actually in the room as well as participating. They're able to share their voice in a way that in a traditional funeral, there isn't that kind of participation. I can imagine being in person at a funeral at the gravesite and projecting on a screen the people that are in the virtual room. Mm-hmm. So here the people who are in person can see them, and the people on the screen can see the ceremony that's happening live. And so you've extended who's able to participate dramatically. I think, like many things, will change in the future. I think the way we do gatherings, ceremonies, any kind of ritualized event is going to change to include those who can't be there in person. I think it'll be a hybrid form for sure.
And have you done that yet, or you're kind of preparing for that?
Well, many people will be in one place and then on the screen together. So right. I know.
Yeah. When we did, my mom's, there were a number of us in the same room together, and we had live musicians, and we were gathered as family, and then we had everybody else beam in. So it was really lovely. And you know something, Frank? People left with the same sense of peace and resolution and proper closure and the send-off, and nothing more needed.
Yeah. It's something how things have changed, huh? So I'm gonna take a real quick 30-second break here. All right. When we come back, I want to talk to you. Well, certainly want you to share with our listeners how they could get a hold of you and learn more. But I want to talk more about the whole grieving process, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So I want to remind everybody that today's show is sponsored by Senior Care Authority, an elder care consulting organization that has a national network of professionally trained and experienced local advisors to assist families in determining the right path for your loved ones. They'll discuss various long-term care options, whether it's in-home care, assisted living, memory care, nursing, or if you just need an advocate to get advice from, a local Senior Care Authority advisor can help you now. So for a free 30-minute consultation with an advisor right in your area, contact Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231, or you could go directly to the website at www.seniorcareauthority.com, and you could find an advisor right in your area. We are back with Kit Pappenheimer and Lynnea Brinkerhoff of Heartfelt Memorials. Just very, very, very interesting. So I don't forget, I don't want to, wait to the very end here. Why don't you share with our listeners, how they could learn more about you?
Sure. Thank you. Our website is heartfeltmemorials.org. You can reach us by phone at 415-488-5262, or you can find us on Facebook at Heartfelt Memorials.
Fantastic. So, in your bio, when I introduced all of you, I know, Lynnea, you are an end-of-life doula. When I think of a doula, what maybe a lot of people maybe think of a doula, they think of a doula in helping in birth of babies, all right? But you're an end-of-life doula. Tell us more about that.
Sure, why not? Yeah, well, you might think of death as another birth. How about that?
Yeah, okay.
And so really, it's the person themselves who are passing that deserves to have someone who is their advocate. Who, what kind of environment do you want around you? Who do you want around you or not? What is most soothing to you in your final days? Do you want essential oils? Do you want beautiful music? Do you want people to be quiet or chatting? Any of that. And so really it's that. And it's being with them about maybe some of their larger questions about coming to their final days and how to find peace and resolution and anything that might be unresolved in them. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So are you also supporting family, or is really the concentration that individual themselves?
As a doula, the primary focus is on the person themselves. And yes, in general, because of the other roles that Kat and I are used to playing, we do honor the family and create a safe place for everybody to be able to grieve properly and also deal with the logistics.
So how does hospice play, what kind of role do you play with hospice then?
So thank goodness for hospice. I'd like to give out, right? Yeah. I'd like to shout out to Zen Hospice Project, formerly Zen Hospice, now Zen Caregiving Project in San Francisco, who really trained me, phenomenal training, and is really Frank Ostrovsky and his crew, Roy Reamer, now the executive director, really, really doing amazing things to support the community. Hospice has become incredibly prevalent in supporting end-of-life care. And as we mentioned at the beginning, our society is really just settling in to honoring end of life and preparing for death in a way that we haven't before. And hospice does just that, brings the conversation of what someone wants at end of death, end of life, and what the family wants up to the point of death. Hospice is wonderful at helping to create a safety net, helping to support the family through their grief process and to support the person who is at their end of life having exactly what they want, to remain comfortable, to receive palliative care. And hospice training, volunteer training really prepared me for being with that experience and helping the family to articulate their experience so that they can then step over the threshold into life beyond their person's life, that next stage after death. How do I now live my life without my loved one, which is where we step in.
Right. So, I know that after our break, you told people how to get a hold of you. And, we have people that are listening right now from all over the country, and even in other countries actually are listening to our show, which is kind of exciting. But can you help people outside? I know you're in the Bay Area, but considering this is virtual, I assume you could help people outside the Bay Area as well, but maybe you could talk about that.
Absolutely. We're available online. Someday we'll be available in person, I'm sure. But for now, absolutely. The best way to reach us is by phone or in a Zoom meeting or even over email for a preliminary conversation. We're available anywhere.
Right, but it doesn't matter where the people are and where they're going to be. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, which is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, and the other important thing about that is that we're trained to speak their spiritual language. Whatever anybody's bent is in terms of how they relate to their own God, right? And whether it's atheism or whether it's Islam or, whatever it happens to be, we want to know what mattered to them. And we represent that and hold that place for them.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to share along those lines. I had an interesting experience with a family where the young people were, didn't really have a spiritual experience yet. And they had lost a young person. And the family, the parents of the person who died, the young man who died, were from a Catholic faith. faith. And weaving together something that worked for both parts of their community to make it work was a big part of the process, how to honor everyone's spiritual experience. And Frank, if I may, I didn't speak earlier. There are sort of 3 offerings that we have in this process. We can lead you in a self-guided process. We can actually facilitate, in which we are more directive about how it could go. And we could even facilitate during the memorial itself as a ceremony, what's it called?
Officiant?
Well, an officiant would be a master of ceremonies. Thank you. I just lost that for just a second. And then finally, we could also be an officiant. We're actually holding a spiritual space for the memorial.
Gotcha.
So all 3 levels.
Right. But if they have if they do have their a priest they're close with, or a rabbi or whatever, you could bring that person into your process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can power well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I know you probably haven't been doing this that long. What have you learned? What have is there anything that you maybe would have done differently, knowing what you know today, or what kind of changes maybe have you made? Tell us kind of this experience, because this is just I think it's just wonderful what you're doing, and you got to be learning as you go a little bit here too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. It's such a humbling experience. You know, what is said is that what is the most personal is also the most universal. The most hidden is the most public, and the most solitary is the most communal. And I would say one thing that I've learned is how, you know, this is something we all are experiencing. We all have parents. We all have a mother. Each one of us has a mother, and yet each death is so unique. So it's the dichotomy of the universality of death and the shared experience, the commonality of facing our own mortality at this moment in life, and really understanding that every single person is going through it in such a unique way, in such unique experiences. People have estranged families. They have different feelings about the person who's died, and their sibling or their friend might have a very different experience of that. And all that comes to the surface at end of life. It's quite a poignant moment.
So I would think that there could be some challenges, similar challenges that even in, you know, the kind of work that I'm involved in with senior care. And many times usually it's the adult children are not all on the same page on the steps that need to be taken, even as it relates to a parent's care. You know, you got a daughter that says, well, I think that we should get a caregiver for dad at home. And you got the sister that says, well, I think we should move to assisted living. And the brother goes, what's wrong with that? I think he's fine, right? And I know you both have gone through this with your own parents. What if the family is just not all on the same page? How do you work through all that? That's sometimes a tough one.
Yeah, I have an estranged brother from the family, and
Yeah.
and yet we honored him just as much as we honored every other family member in our service, and it worked just fine. You know, we operated as if, and we got whatever information that we could from the different players and the chief mourners, we call them. And we proceeded with as much love. I mean, this is really a time to come to peace and to have this ceremony be a place where people simply share their appreciation for the one who has passed and all that they've meant to all of us. And so it's a time of reparation as well.
Great.
And Frank, I'd add that I think I'm sure you know this from your experience, but having a neutral party to be
Yes.
to be the receiver of what each member of the family needs, instead of them talking to each other, to really facilitate conversations and to hear people as an objective listener.
Great. Right. So we've got, mean, I could talk to you for quite a while about this subject matter. We got a minute and a half, 2 minutes left here. So I'm going to leave it up to you here. Just any parting words, any things you think our listeners should consider, words of wisdom, anything at all. I'll let you go.
I'm going to do just a few logistics and let Lynnea end with some broader words. I want to just name that the federal government has allocated funds as very recently, within the last week. So if you have lost someone in 2020 due to COVID, that money, you can be reimbursed by the federal government. So it could also cover memorial costs. That's one thing. And then I also just wanted to name that our costs start roughly around $600 for very basic services and go up, just so people have an idea of what we're offering.
And all that I want to offer here is, Frank, that, there's change and there's transition. Event is a change. Death is a change. Transition is the human process that we have to traverse and go through in ourselves uniquely in order to come to resolution and to come to completion. And so the grieving process is critical to that. And we assist in all of that. We're really focused on the grieving process and the uniqueness of that. And so we provide a space for people to do unique ritual. And we like to use our experience for people we say there's 3 forms of remembering. And so it's remembering the person that we loved, remembering ourselves at that time and the riches of who that person was for us that we want to take forward, and also remembering the community without this member in our community in their human form. And so that's what it is that we're about very much. And they say those who fail to grieve give much grief to others. And so we are here to assist people to grieve. They say it's a social responsibility to do this well.
That's wonderful. So check it out, heartfeltmemorials.org. Check it out. Kit and Lynnea, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers today. It was just wonderful, and thank you for all you do. Thanks so much. I want to thank everybody. Be safe out there. We'll talk to you all soon.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.